Henry Wallace vanished on an evening jog, Claire Morgan was taken from a parked car, and both were last seen near the abandoned house on Willow Lane, a place that would later reveal shallow graves, decades of secrets, and the chilling truth. Of a predator who had lived among them all along the town of Ridgewood looked like the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. The lawns were trimmed to perfection, cars sat polished in driveways, and the air always seemed to smell faintly of fresh flowers in spring. People like to say that Ridgewood was a bubble, a quiet corner of the world untouched by crime or tragedy. It was the kind of place where children rode their bikes without fear and neighbors smiled at each other from across white picket fences. That image of safety, however, was more fragile than anyone could have imagined, and the first crack appeared on a quiet evening in early summer. Henry Wallace had lived in Ridgewood for most of his life. He was a man people recognized even if they did not know him well. He was known for his evening jogs, running the same route almost every night, his shoes pounding steadily against the pavement while he waved to familiar faces. It was a routine no one thought much about until the evening he did not return. At first, there was no alarm. People assumed he had stayed late at work or decided to drive somewhere after his run. But by the following morning, when his front door remained locked, his phone went unanswered, and his bed untouched, worry began to spread. His sneakers were found not far from Willow Lane, neatly placed at the edge of the road as if he had paused for a moment and then vanished into the night. There were no signs of struggle, no discarded belongings, and no trace of where he had gone. The police treated it as a missing person case, combing the neighborhood for clues, but their searches turned up nothing. With no evidence of foul play, many convinced themselves Henry had simply left town. A man starting over, they reasoned, was far easier to believe than something sinister lurking in their quiet community. Whispers spread quietly among the residents. Some suggested Henry had financial troubles. Others muttered about a strained relationship with his family that might have driven him away. It was easier to cling to rumors than to face the gnawing unease that came with the thought of an unseen danger in their midst. Within weeks, the chatter faded, and Ridgewood slipped back into its rhythm of manicured lawns and polite smiles, yet beneath that calm surface, unease lingered. The location where Henry's sneakers had been found unsettled some of the neighbors. They lay only a few feet from the abandoned house at the end of Willow Lane. The property had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. Children avoided it on their way to school, daring each other to step onto the cracked driveway or peer through the broken windows. Adults dismissed it as nothing more than an eyesore, too costly to repair and too unstable to demolish. Its rotting wood and sagging roof had become part of the background, ignored by those who lived around it. But there was something about that house that unsettled people in ways they could not explain. On summer nights, some swore they saw faint flickers of light behind the shattered glass. Others spoke of strange smells drifting across the street when the wind shifted. No one ever investigated. It was easier to pretend nothing was wrong. Ridgewood had a reputation for safety, and confronting the truth threatened that image. The disappearance of Henry Wallace was not enough to break that illusion. People moved on, convincing themselves that it had nothing to do with them. They avoided Willow Lane a little more carefully, quickening their steps when they passed the abandoned property, but they carried on with their lives. The town remained as polished and peaceful as it had always appeared, at least on the surface. Yet, hidden in that forgotten house at the edge of the street, something patient and cruel was watching, waiting for the next chance to strike T first. The town treated Henry Wallace's disappearance like a strange but isolated event. His photograph remained pinned to bulletin boards, his name printed across flyers, but as the days dragged into weeks, the search began to lose its urgency. People returned to their routines, choosing to believe that Henry had made his own choices and left. The illusion of Ridgewood safety was stronger than the fear of admitting that something darker might be hiding among them. Life continued, yet the silence that followed Henry's vanishing left a mark, even if most refused to acknowledge it. The quiet was broken only a few months later, when another name was added to the list of the missing. Claire Morgan was nothing like Henry. She was young, full of energy, and deeply woven into the community. She worked as a teacher at the local elementary school, and nearly every family knew her. Her students adored her, and parents praised her kindness and patience. When she failed to appear for work one morning, people immediately noticed. Her colleagues assumed she was sick, but when she could not be reached, concern turned into alarm. Claire's car was discovered parked neatly outside her apartment building. The driver's door was closed, the keys still hanging from the ignition, and her purse sat on the passenger seat. The apartment itself was untouched, nothing missing or disturbed. To those who knew her, it made no sense. Claire had no reason to disappear, no history of problems that might explain her absence. What unsettled the community most was the familiarity of it all, the same strange emptiness that surrounded Henry's disappearance. One moment present, the next gone, leaving behind only unanswered questions. For the first time, whispers in Ridgewood took on a sharper edge. People remembered the sneakers left behind near Willow Lane. Now, Claire's apartment stood just a short walk away from the same street. Though no one wanted to say it outright, a thread was forming, connecting the missing to the abandoned house that everyone tried so hard to ignore. Families stopped letting their children play outside after dark. Joggers changed their routes, steering far away from Willow Lane even in broad daylight. The police increased their patrols, but without evidence, their presence felt hollow. No one had seen anything. No one had heard cries for help or noticed suspicious strangers. The silence was almost worse than the crime itself. It gave the impression that the disappearances had been carried out not with violence, but with eerie precision, as if whoever was responsible moved like a shadow, slipping in and out without leaving a trace. The abandoned house at the end of Willow Lane grew into something more than an eyesore in people's minds. It became a quiet obsession. Some swore. They had seen figures moving through the overgrown yard at night. Others claimed to hear faint scratching noises, like claws dragging across wood. The story spread quickly, each retelling more unsettling than the last. Still, no one dared to confront it. Adults brushed away their fears with nervous laughter, but their eyes betrayed unease whenever the house came into view. By late autumn, Ridgewood no longer felt like the same place. The warmth of the town's reputation began to erode, replaced with suspicion. Neighbors who once greeted each other with easy smiles now avoided eye contact, each silently wondering who might be next to vanish. Parents gripped their children's hands more tightly, and locks were checked twice before bedtime. The safety net that Ridgewood had prided itself on was unraveling. The whispers grew louder, though few dared to speak openly. The missing had more in common than just proximity to Willow Lane. Each of them had been last seen walking near the abandoned house. Each disappearance was silent, leaving behind no clue but an unfinished routine. It was too precise to be chance, too unnerving to ignore. Something was happening in Ridgewood, something no one wanted to face. The town was no longer just a quiet suburb. It had become a stage for fear, where the air carried an unspoken warning. Whatever had taken Henry Wallace had returned for Claire Morgan. And deep down, even the most stubborn residents could feel it. This would not be the end. The turning point came on a damp afternoon when the clouds hung low over Ridgewood, casting the town in a muted grey. A group of restless teenagers, fueled by boredom and a dare, decided to break into the abandoned house on Willow Lane. Everyone knew the stories. Some said it was haunted, others swore it was cursed. But for those teenagers, fear was a challenge, not a deterrent. They crept through the broken fence and pushed open the rotting door, the hinges shrieking as if warning them to leave. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of mildew and something sharper that they could not quite place. Dust coated every surface, and the silence was so complete that even their own breaths seemed too loud. What began as nervous laughter quickly shifted into unease. The living room was littered with broken furniture, their shapes distorted by years of neglect. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing damp plaster underneath. Yet there were signs that the house was not entirely abandoned. A candle stub sat melted into a dish on the floor, its wax hardened only recently. In the kitchen, beneath the dust and grime, Footprints had pressed into the dirt, leading toward the basement door. The teenagers hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances, but curiosity pulled them deeper. The basement stairs groaned under their weight, each step echoing into the darkness below. The smell grew stronger the further they descended, a sour mixture of decay and damp earth. Their flashlight beams swept across the walls, illuminating claw-like scratches etched into the wood. At the far end of the basement, a section of floorboards appeared newer than the rest, uneven and hastily nailed down. When one of them crouched to pry at the edges, the boards lifted too easily, revealing a hollow space beneath. The discovery froze them in place. Shallow graves stretched beneath the basement floor, each one holding fragments of lives abruptly ended. Scraps of clothing lay tangled with bones, small personal items scattered as though carelessly discarded. A bracelet glinted under the flashlight, still wrapped around the wrist of its owner. The stench of rot was overwhelming, and the reality of what they had uncovered hit with the weight of a nightmare. The teenagers fled the house, stumbling back into the street with pale faces and shaking hands. Their screams carried through the neighborhood, drawing the attention of neighbors and, soon after, the police. Within hours, Willow Lane was sealed off. Officers in gloves and masks swarmed the property, carefully cataloguing each grim piece of evidence. News spread quickly, and Ridgewood was thrown into chaos. The whispers that had haunted the community were no longer whispers. They were fact. Henry Wallace and Claire Morgan had not simply vanished. They had been taken, their remains hidden beneath the house that everyone had tried to ignore. The police confirmed that multiple graves existed, more than anyone could immediately identify. Some appeared older, their bones weathered by time, while others were alarmingly fresh. Despite the discoveries, the investigation only deepened the mystery. No fingerprints were left behind, no tools or weapons uncovered. Whoever had used the house had been careful, deliberate, and invisible. Yet signs of recent life were undeniable. Half-eaten food, a blanket tucked in the corner, and discarded water bottles hinted that someone had been staying there, perhaps even watching as the town carried on with its daily life. The community's fear shifted into something darker. If the killer had been there all this time, then he had been living among them, moving unseen through the streets they once considered safe. Parents pulled their children out of schools, families packed overnight bags, and doors that had never been locked before were bolted shut. The abandoned house, once an uncomfortable curiosity, had become the heart of Ridgewood's nightmare. It was no longer a place to be avoided out of superstition. It was proof that evil had been festering in their midst. The graves told a story of years of silence, a pattern of vanishing lives hidden in plain sight. And the question that kept everyone awake at night was simple but terrifying. If the house had given up its secrets, where was the one who had created them? Investigators poured through every corner of the abandoned house, peeling away layers of dust and decay in search of answers. What they found was not only disturbing but also deeply confusing. The basement graves told a story of multiple victims. Over many years, far longer than the recent disappearances that had shaken Ridgewood. Some remains were decades old, others only months. The pattern suggested that someone had been killing quietly and consistently, without ever drawing suspicion. The house had not been abandoned at all. It had been used as a hunting ground property. Records became the next focus. The house on Willow Lane had once belonged to the Reynolds family, a name barely remembered by the older residents of the town. The family had lived there more than 20 years ago before suddenly vanishing. At the time, people had assumed they had left in the middle of the night due to financial troubles. No investigation had ever been opened, no questions asked. Ridgewood had always been a place where unpleasant things were brushed aside, hidden, beneath layers of politeness and routine. The Reynolds family had slipped out of memory just as easily as they had slipped out of town. But the deeper the investigators dug, the stranger the history became. School records showed that the Reynolds family had 3 children, though only 2 were ever seen at community events. Teachers recalled odd behavior from one of the sons, a boy who rarely spoke and often disappeared during recess. He was never photographed, never mentioned in local newsletters, almost as if the family had tried to erase his existence from public life. Rumors from decades past suggested he spent most of his time in the basement, locked away from the outside world. When the family left, it was assumed all of them had gone together, yet no record of that boy existed beyond Ridgewood's borders. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Theories began to spread quickly. Could it be that the Reynolds family had not abandoned the house entirely? Perhaps one of them had stayed behind. The thought of a person living unnoticed in the decaying structure for years seemed impossible, yet the evidence was hard to deny. Investigators found signs of recent habitation, makeshift bedding, old food wrappers, and tunnels dug into the earth beneath the basement. These tunnels stretched far beneath the property, some leading to hidden exits that spilled into nearby woods and drainage systems. Whoever lived there had been moving undetected, able to slip in and out without being seen. The dates of the disappearances painted a chilling picture. Henry Wallace, Claire Morgan, and several unidentified victims had all vanished around the same time of year, just weeks apart. Records showed other unexplained disappearances in Ridgewoods. History, dating back nearly 2 decades, all clustered around the same season. The rhythm was almost ritualistic, as though the killer was following a strict cycle. Every year, someone would vanish. Some years drew less attention, the missing dismissed as runaways or people leaving town. Other years, the disappearances struck too close to home to ignore. Yet no one had ever connected the dots until now. The town's collective denial became impossible to sustain. What once looked like coincidence now appeared deliberate, a pattern too precise to dismiss. The idea that someone had lived among them, emerging from tunnels beneath the ground to take lives, shattered Ridgewood's sense of normalcy. The image of a quiet, safe suburb was gone, replaced with a gnawing dread that their community had been feeding a predator for years. Police worked tirelessly to track leads, but every clue led back to the same unsettling conclusion. A member of the Reynolds family had never left. He had stayed in the shadows, perfecting his ability to remain unseen. And now that his home had been exposed, the fear was not just about what he had done, but about what he might do next. If he had survived undetected for this long, then he had learned how to adapt. He had learned how to wait. And with the tunnels stretching like veins beneath Ridgewood, the boundary between safety and danger was thinner than anyone dared to admit. The storm that finally unmasked the truth struck Ridgewood on a night that seemed ordinary at first. Thick clouds rolled in at dusk, bringing heavy rain and sharp winds that rattled windows and bent trees. The streets emptied quickly as families retreated indoors, shutting blinds and locking doors against the weather. Few could have known that the storm would do what months of investigation had failed to accomplish. It would drive the hidden predator out of the shadows. Floodwaters gathered quickly in the low parts of town, seeping into basements and draining into the network of tunnels beneath Willow Lane. Those tunnels, carved over years of secrecy, had always offered the perfect hiding place. But water did not respect boundaries. It surged into the underground passages, swallowing them in mud and debris. Trapped within his own labyrinth, the man who had haunted Ridgewood had no choice but to surface. It was a patrol officer who first spotted him, stumbling near the edge of the woods behind Willow Lane. The officer had been checking for downed power lines when the beam of his flashlight caught the figure of a man crawling through the rain-soaked grass. His body was frail, his skin pale, as though it had not seen sunlight in years. His clothes clung to him, shredded and filthy, while his eyes glimmered with a wild, unrecognizable emptiness. He looked less like a man and more like something that had crawled out of the earth. Backup arrived quickly, and the figure was restrained without resistance. He was too weak to fight, his body trembling from exposure and exhaustion. Yet even in his fragile state, there was something unsettling about him. The officers reported that he clutched a bundle to his chest, refusing to release it until it was forced from his grip. Inside were objects taken from his victims: a necklace, a watch, a small notebook with names scrawled inside. Each item told the same story, tying him directly to the graves in the basement. The arrest sent shockwaves through Ridgewood. For weeks, the community had lived with the knowledge that someone had been hunting them, yet few believed he would ever be caught. To see him in chains, no longer a shadow but a man of flesh and bone, brought both relief and horror. He was not a faceless monster from folklore. He had been human once, raised in the very neighborhood he terrorized, shaped by the walls of the house that everyone had ignored. Humanity had not simply faded from him. It had been stripped away, leaving behind only obsession and hunger. Interrogations revealed little. He spoke sparingly, muttering words that made little sense, sometimes reciting dates that matched the disappearances, sometimes repeating names of people no one recognized. What became clear was that he had followed a rhythm, a cycle he could not break. Each year, he chose someone new. Each year, he buried the evidence beneath the house while the town turned a blind eye. His rituals had grown into a way of life, and the silence of Ridgewood had allowed him to thrive. The trial that followed drew national attention. Journalists descended on the quiet town, broadcasting images of the once-forgotten house, the graves, and the pale figure who had emerged from a storm. Neighbors testified about the years they had ignored strange smells or flickering lights, each realizing too late how many signs they had dismissed. The weight of guilt hung over Ridgewood as heavily as the crimes themselves. For every victim, there had been a moment when someone had noticed something odd but chosen to say nothing. In the end, justice was delivered, but peace was harder to find. The house on Willow Lane was demolished, brick by brick, until nothing remained but an empty lot. A fence was raised, not to keep danger out, but to mark the place where danger had once lived unseen. People walked past with lowered eyes, unwilling to glance at the scar in their neighborhood. Ridgewood tried to move on, but the story left a stain that could not be erased. The predator was gone, yet the community had learned a devastating lesson. The real terror had not only been the man who killed, but the silence that had protected him. For years, humanity had disappeared before their eyes, not only in the life of a boy who grew into a killer, but also in the choices of neighbors who looked away. The storm revealed the truth, but the memory of their blindness remained, a reminder that evil does not always arrive from outside. Sometimes it grows quietly, in the places we call home.